Good day, children. The Third Level by Jack Finney is a story that weaves together a psychological journey of the narrator into past, present, and moves towards future. The third level in the title refers to the additional level that Charlie, the narrator, comes across at the Grand Central Station in New York, which originally has only 2 levels. The subway becomes the link between the narrator's harsh reality and fantasy. Let us move to the lesson. The Third Level by Jack Finney. The presidents of the New York Central and the New York, New Haven and Hartford railroads will swear on a stack of timetables that there are only 2. But I say there are 3. Because I have been on the 3rd level of the Grand Central Station. Yes, I have taken the obvious step. I talked to a psychiatrist friend of mine, among others. I told him about the 3rd level at Grand Central Station, and he said it was a waking dream wish fulfillment. He said I was unhappy that made my wife kind of mad, but he explained that he meant the modern world is full of insecurity, fear, war, worry, and all the rest of it, and that I just want to escape. Well, who doesn't? Everybody I know wants to escape, but they don't wander down into any 3rd level at Grand Central Station. The story begins with a mention of a 3rd level at Grand Central Station upon which a protagonist stumbles. He says that the presidents of the New York Central and the New York, New Haven and Hartford railroads will swear upon a stack of timetable that there are only 2 levels. But he says that he has gone into a 3rd level. So he decides to do what all expect him to do, go and see a psychiatrist who was also his friend. The psychiatrist explains that Charlie was experiencing a waking dream wish fulfillment or hallucination in simple terms because he was unhappy. His wife was angry with this diagnosis. He further explained that the worries of the modern world like insecurity, fear, war, stress were pushing Charlie to seek an escape route. But the narrator thought it odd and wondered why others didn't see this level. Para 2. But that is the reason, he said, and my friends all agreed. Everything points to it, they claimed. My stamp collecting, for example, that is a temporary refuge from reality. Well, maybe, but my grandfather didn't need any refuge from reality. Things were pretty nice and peaceful in his day, from all I hear. And he started my stamp collection. It's a nice collection too. Blocks of 4 of practically every US issue, first day cars, and so on. President Roosevelt collected stamps too, you know. So all his friends too agreed with the psychiatrist's explanation and pointed out that Charlie's hobby of stamp collection or philately was also his way of escaping from harsh reality. But the narrator inherited this hobby from his grandfather who lived in Galesburg where things were pretty nice and peaceful and wonders why his grandfather had this hobby. He justifies President Roosevelt too collected stamps. Para 3. Anyway, here is what happened at Grand Central. One night last summer, I worked late at the office. I was in a hurry to get uptown to my apartment, so I decided to take the subway from Grand Central because it's faster than the bus. So he goes on to narrate how he came across the Grand Central Station. It happened in the previous summer when he was returning home late one night after work. He was in a hurry to get home, so he decided to take the subway instead of bus because it was faster. Paragraph 4. Now I don't know why this should have happened to me. I'm just an ordinary guy named Charlie. 31 years old, and I was wearing a tan gabardine suit and a straw hat with a fancy band. I passed a dozen men who looked just like me, and I wasn't trying to escape from anything. I just wanted to get home to Louisa, my wife. So in this paragraph, we get a clear glimpse of the narrator who calls himself an ordinary guy by name of Charlie, aged 31, in a normal state of mind, not wanting to escape from anywhere. He was wearing an attire worn by every other man who went for work. Nothing extraordinary about him. He was just like others, a man tired after work, longing to return to the comfort of his home and his wife. Paragraph 5. I turned into Grand Central from Vanderbilt Avenue and went down the steps to the first level where you take trains like the 20th century. Then I walked down another flight to the second level where the suburban trains leave from, ducked into an arched doorway heading for the subway, and got lost. That's easy to do. I have been in and out of Grand Central hundreds of times, but I am always bumping into new doorways and stairs and corridors. Once I got into a tunnel about a mile long and came out in the lobby of the Roosevelt Hotel. Another time I came up in an office building on 46th Street, 3 blocks away. Charlie now comes to the part of the incident where he entered the Grand Central from Vanderbilt Avenue. He took stairs to the first level where one boarded trains like the 20th century. Then he went down further to the second level from where the suburban trains leave and entered an arched doorway and got lost. But that was nothing unusual for him because there were occasions when he bumped into new corridors and doorways. Once he had entered a tunnel which was a mile long and had ended in the lobby of Roosevelt Hotel, and another time he walked into an office building which was 3 blocks away. Paragraph 6. Sometimes I think Grand Central is growing like a tree, pushing out new corridors and staircases like roots. There is probably a long tunnel that nobody knows about, feeling its way under the city right now, on its way to Times Square, and maybe another to Central Park. And maybe, because for so many people through the years, Grand Central has been an exit, a way of escape. Maybe that's how the tunnel I got into. But I never told my psychiatrist friend about that idea. So he goes on to explain. The narrator feels that maybe the Grand Central is expanding like a tree, spreading its roots, pushing out new corridors and staircases. He thinks that there is a long tunnel under the city which opens into Times Square and Central Park. He feels that Grand Central Station is a place of exit for many people who want to escape reality. But he never shared this thought with his psychiatrist friend. Paragraph 7. The corridor I was in began angling left and slanting downward, and I thought that was wrong. But I kept on walking. All I could hear was the empty sound of my own footsteps, and I didn't pass a soul. Then I heard that sort of hollow roar ahead that means open space and people talking. The tunnel turned sharp left. I went down a short flight of stairs and came out on the 3rd level at Grand Central Station. For just a moment I thought I was back on the 2nd level, but I saw the room was smaller. There were fewer ticket windows and train gates, and the information booth in the center was wood and old-looking, and the man in the booth wore a green eye shade and long black sleeve protectors. The lights were dim and sort of flickering. Then I saw why. There were open flame gas lights. So he notices that the corridor that the narrator took turned left, and he thought he was taking the wrong way, but he continued walking. He could only hear his own footsteps. There was nobody there. Then he could hear a row, which meant an open space and people. He went down a flight of stairs and reached the third level at the Grand Central Station. For a moment, he wondered if he was on the second level, but noticed that the room was smaller. There were fewer ticket windows and train gates. The information booth was made of wood and looked old. The staff sitting there wore a green eye shade and a long black sleeve protectors. They were using gas lights, and so the lights were dim and flickering. Paragraph 8. There were brass spittoons on the floor, and across the station a glint of light caught my eye. A man was pulling a gold watch from his vest pocket. He snapped open the cover, glanced at his watch and frowned. He wore a derby hat, a black 4-button suit with tiny lapels, and he had a big black handlebar moustache. Then I looked around and saw that everyone in the station was dressed like 1890 something. I never saw so many beards, sideburns, and fancy moustaches in my life. A woman walked in through the train gate. She wore a dress with leg of mutton sleeves and skirts to the top of her high-button shoes. Back of her, out on the tracks, I caught a glimpse of a locomotive. A very small Currier and Ives locomotive with a funnel-shaped stack, and then I knew. So he continues to explain how the third level was. Brass vessels were placed for people to spit if needed. A glimpse of light caught Charlie's eye, and he saw a man pulling out his gold watch from the vest to check the time, unlike the present-day wristwatch. He was also dressed in old-fashioned style and sported a big black handlebar moustache. Looking around, he found people dressed similarly in the 1890s fashion, and they all sported fancy moustache, beard, and sideburns. He noticed a woman wearing an extraordinarily puffed sleeves and a long skirt. And then, behind her, on the track, he saw a very small Currier and Ives locomotive, or the railway engine, which ran on steam and which had a metal chimney like a funnel on top. And then he realized he had gone back in time. To make sure, I walked over to a newsboy and glanced at the stack of papers at his feet. It was The World, and The World hasn't been published for many years. The lead story said something about President Cleveland, and I've found that front page since in the public library files, and it was printed June 11, 1894. So in order to confirm his thought of going back in time, he walks over to a boy selling newspaper and checks the date on the newspaper tagged there. He notices that the newspaper is The World, which was discontinued years ago, and the lead story was about the then President Cleveland. And then he checked the date and found that the print date was June 11, 1894. Thus, he confirmed that the third level had taken him back to 1894. Para 10. I turned towards the ticket windows, knowing that here, on the third level, at Grand Central, I could buy tickets that would take Louisa and me anywhere in the United States we wanted to go. In the year 1894, and I wanted 2 tickets to Galesburg, Illinois. Have you ever been there? It's a wonderful town still, with big old frame houses, huge lawns, and tremendous trees whose branches meet overhead and roof the streets. And in 1894, summer evenings were twice as long, and people sat out on their lawns, the men smoking cigars and talking quietly, and women waving palm leaf fans with the fireflies all around in a peaceful world. To be back there with the First World War still 20 years off and World War II over 40 years in the future. I wanted 2 tickets for that. So he decides to go to the counter that sells ticket to get the ticket for his wife and him to go to Galesburg, Illinois. He had heard of Galesburg, a peaceful town that existed in 1890s, probably from his grandfather. It was a wonderful town filled with greenery. There were big houses with huge lawns and trees, the branches acting like a canopy for the streets. Summer evenings were long, and men sat in the lawn smoking and talking, and women fanning themselves with palm leaf fans. There would be fireflies flying around. This world was full of peace and serenity, with First World War 20 years away and Second World War 40 years away. This was an ideal world, in contrast to the stressful world Charlie lived in. No doubt, Charlie wanted to escape to this world with his wife, and hence he went to the ticket counter. Paragraph 11. The clerk figured the fare. He glanced at my fancy headband, but he figured the fare, and I had enough for 2 coach tickets one way. But when I counted out the money and looked up, the clerk was staring at me. He nodded at the bills. "That ain't money, mister," he said. "And if you're trying to skin me, you won't get very far." And he glanced at the cash drawer beside him. Of course, the money was old-style bills, half again as big as the money we use nowadays, and different looking. I turned away and got out fast. There's nothing nice about jail, even in 1894. So he goes to the counter to get 2 tickets for his wife and for himself. But it was not so easy as he figured. The clerk calculated the fare to Galesburg, and as he told him, he looked with amusement at the fancy attire of Charlie. Charlie had the amount. He counted the exact amount and gave it to the clerk. The clerk refused to take it and said that it was not money, and he threatened Charlie. The currency in 1894 was different from the currency of Charlie's time. Charlie rushed out of 3rd level as he did not want to be arrested. Para 12. And that was that. I left the same way I came, I suppose. Next day, during lunch hour, I drew $300 out of the bank, nearly all we had, and bought old-style currency. That really worried my psychiatrist friend. You can buy old money at almost any coin dealers, but you have to pay a premium. My $300 bought less than $200 in old-style bills. But I didn't care. Eggs were 13 cents a dozen in 1894. So he exited the same way he entered, as he feared an arrest. Now his mind was focused on going to Galesburg. So the next day, he withdrew $300, almost all he had saved, and exchanged it for old currency at a coin dealer's. He was paying a lot for the old currency, but he did not regret, as things were very cheap in 1894, and this money would be sufficient for him and his wife to survive. But when this information was conveyed to his psychiatrist, it did not augur well with his psychiatrist friend. Paragraph 13. But I have never again found a corridor that leads to the 3rd level at Grand Central Station, although I have tried often enough. Louisa was pretty worried when I told her all this, and didn't want me to look for the 3rd level anymore, and after a while I stopped. I went back to my stamps, but now we are both looking every weekend, because now we have proof that the 3rd level is still there. My friend Sam Wiener disappeared. Nobody knew where. But I sort of suspected, because Sam's a city boy and I used to tell him about Galesburg. I went to school there and he always said he liked the sound of the place. And that's where he is, all right, in 1894. So having done all this, Charlie returned to Grand Central Station. But he never found a 3rd level despite hard efforts. His wife was worried when he confided in her and told him not to go in search of the 3rd level again. He decided to take comfort in his hobby of stamp collection. but he believed the third level existed because his friend and psychiatrist Sam Weiner, who is also a city guy, disappeared. And Charlie believed that Sam had gone to Galesburg through the third level because he had heard from Charlie that it was a peaceful world. Paragraph 14, because one night, fussing with my stamp collection, I found, well, do you know what a first day cover is? When a new stamp is issued, stamp collectors buy some and use them to mail envelopes to themselves on the very first day of sale, and the postmark proves the date. The envelope is called a first day cover. They are never opened. You just put blank paper in the envelope. So now Charlie has strong reasons to believe that this because one night as he was going through his stamp collection, he noticed a first day cover. So in this paragraph, he explains what a first day cover is. So he believes, he thinks that he has proved that Sam Weiner has gone to Galesburg, and also explains what a first day cover is. He explains it is an envelope that the stamp collectors mail to themselves when a new stamp is issued and to mark the date of the first day of its sale. The envelope only has a blank paper and is not meant to be opened. So it's an envelope that the stamp collectors mail to themselves when a new stamp is out to mark the date of the first day of its sale. So they post it to themselves. Paragraph 15. That night, among my oldest first day covers, I found one that shouldn't have been there. But there it was. It was there because someone had mailed it to my grandfather at his home in Galesburg. That's what the address on the envelope said. And it had been there since July 18, 1894. The postmark showed that. Yet, I didn't remember it at all. The stamp was 6-cent dull brown with a picture of the President Garfield. Naturally, when the envelope came to Granddad in the mail, it went right into his collection and stayed there till I took it out and opened it. The paper inside wasn't blank. It read. The address of his grandfather's house was there, and it was addressed to Charlie. I got to wishing that you were right. Then I got to believing you were right. And Charlie, it's true. I found the third level. I've been here 2 weeks, and right now down the street at the Dallies, someone is playing a piano, and they are all out on the front porch singing, Seeing Nellie Home, and I'm invited over for lemonade. Come on back, Charlie and Louisa. Keep looking till you find the third level. It's worth it. Believe me. The note is signed, Sam. So that night, he was surprised to find among his grandfather's first day covers an envelope that he had never seen before. It had the address of his grandfather's home in Galesburg. The postmark on the stamp showed July 18, 1894, and the stamp had a picture of President Garfield. He examined it and found that the paper inside was not blank. It was a letter from Sam, the psychiatrist, addressed to Charlie. The letter talked about how Sam had wished the third level story was true, and then he himself believed in it. He had found the third level and had reached Galesburg 2 weeks before. So through the letter, he urges Charlie and his wife Louisa to keep searching for the third level and to reach Galesburg at the earliest, as the place was beautiful and worth it. The letter was signed from Sam. Paragraph 16. At the stamp and coin store I go to, I found out that Sam bought $800 worth of old-style currency that ought to set him up in a nice little hay feed and grain business. He always said that's what he really wished he could do, and he certainly can't go back to his old business, not in Galesburg, Illinois, in 1894. His old business. Why? Sam was my psychiatrist. So when Charlie goes to the coin dealer, he found out that Sam had exchanged $800 for old currency. He could use it to start a hay, feed and grain business in Galesburg. That is what he had longed for, as he cannot thrive as a psychiatrist. In Galesburg, because Galesburg is a peaceful world and nobody there suffers from any anxiety or stress. In short, psychiatrists have no place in a peaceful and perfect Galesburg. So that brings us to the end of the lesson. To go through the interpretation now, there are various interpretations for this story, and the most common one is that all this experience is a hallucination of Charlie as he suffers from the worries of a modern man. His psychiatrist's diagnosis that he suffers from waking dream wish fulfillment is proof of that. Charlie is unable to cope with all the stress related to the modern day and hence seeks refuge in fantasy, in Galesburg, in all the stories he has heard from his grandfather. His mind longs to escape into that peaceful world and so plays trick with him, which is called hallucination in psychology. When a person hallucinates, his senses are also at work, and that is why Charlie sees a letter from Sam which actually doesn't exist. So that brings us to the end of the third level by Jack Finney. Thank you, children.